Welcome to Let's Not Circle Back, the podcast where we dive into the real conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging without the fluff. I'm one of your hosts, Pam Jeffords, and today I'm thrilled to kick off our very first episode with my incredible business partner, Dr. Patrice Palmer. Together, we'll be covering the 5 things organizations need to focus on during this first 100 days under the new administration. So grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let's get started. All right, so I am excited today to be joined with my colleague, Dr. Patrice Palmer, as we talk about the first 100 days of DEI under this new administration. And I know that we've got a huge report on some tips and tricks and things to think about that we'll be sharing with everyone. But today, I really just wanted to dive deep with you, Patrice, on our top 5, right? I know I've got mine and you've got yours, but I really want to think about that first one. And I think that first one is, it's got to be that realistic tip, like just don't panic.
Stop panicking. Okay, so my first one that I would honestly say that we have to do is stop panicking. Like, this don't panic to me seems so normal, but everybody is panicking. I've been in so many meetings over the past month that is just about, what are we going to do with the name? What are we about to do with this? And I'm like, we haven't even been given an actual directive yet, but everybody is panicking. Everyone, it's going to go away. And I'm like, can things stop? Can things be halted? Can things be frustrating? Yes, all these things are real. And stop for just a second. Let's reevaluate and know how we're moving. But honestly, Pam, my first thing is y'all need to stop panicking, because this is getting on my nerves. Like, let's be real. Let's be real. This is real talk. We're gonna do real talk, and I don't think we're doing any favors by just, well, we should. No, stop.
I think you're right. And I think the companies that this was always part of what they did and they believed in it are doubling down. You know, we're getting more business, more calls than before. The companies who probably were on the surface anyway, and it was, we have to do it, they're probably using this as an excuse. And so I think it's business as usual. But I do think, you know, with all this noise out here, probably my number one thing is reframing that pushback that you're seeing into feedback. So we're getting all this external noise and these activists that are definitely pushing back on this work. But when your employees and your leaders, your business leaders, start to use that noise and that pushback from the external to pause things internally, we need to consider that as feedback and say, you know, why are they doing that? Why did they jump on this when, because we've had pushback for years around DEI. So why now? Why are people actually questioning, should we stop? What should we be doing? Why do how can we reframe this pushback into good organizational feedback?
Yeah. So first of all, I love the fact that we need to reframe it as feedback, because everyone, and again, I think we're very transparent in our work and how we show up and in our identities. And so a lot of people are so tied into the work through their identities that it literally is a personal attack against them as a human being. It's not just the work. As a Black queer person, when I walk into a space, I don't get to take it off. And so my identity shows up in my work, it's in my conversation, it's everywhere all the time, right? And so for so many folks, when they think about reframing, it's as if they're stopping that part of their identity. And it's like, no, everything I say is still gonna have a twinge, a twang, a deep-seated understanding of the Black experience from my lived perspective. It's going to be as gay as I can possibly make it. It's going to be non-binary, and we're going to use as many different pronouns as I can possibly think of in order to reframe and make it as inclusive as possible. That ain't stopping. So why are folks getting so caught up in the reframe that they forget that it really is just feedback? And if we actually look at it as feedback and start really trying to break it down in that perspective, then we'll actually be able to get somewhere with it. Because again, people are not, like you said, the noise has been here. Like people have been talking mess. They've been talking smack for years. We've gone through all these different iterations, and it has not taken hold like it has now. That's because something that we are doing needs to be reevaluated. It needs to be renovated. It needs to be reimagined. I would even be as cheeky as saying it needs to be framed. But that's a whole nother conversation. We're not going to go down that. That, that
I love it. I
but
love it. Well,
true. I really think we need to do something different in that regard.
and then if we look at my number three, right, which is that data driven approach, I've been doing this work since before 2012, and companies always say they have a data driven approach to DEI, and then when we come in there, they don't, right? It's they're tracking representation, and they're calling that a data driven approach. It's like that's not a data driven approach. That's just tracking representation against some arbitrary goal that you've decided,
Mm-hmm.
and representation changes so frequently. You can have an acquisition or sell off a division of your company or go through a reduction in force, and all of a sudden your representation is totally different. And people get it's like whack a mole, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about a data driven strategy, what we're talking about is, are you looking at the experiences of your workforce? So let's look at your internal labor market. Who's actually in your organization? Let's not worry about who's outside of it right now, but who's in it. And then ask yourself the question, are certain populations, like are your Hispanic employees, are they leaving at greater rates at a certain level? Are your Black employees not getting promoted at a certain level? They're hitting a ceiling. Are your white men, is your healthcare data telling you that your white men are doing depression, anxiety, and sleeplessness medication at greater rates than they were before? That's a data. Or your LGBTQ employees not getting the same quality and quantity of feedback as other employees. That's a data driven strategy. What are your employees going through? What experiences and what are those gaps? That can help you target interventions around particular populations. I don't know what your thoughts are, what you're seeing with data driven strategies.
Okay, so first of all, I love how we're talking right now. So, as a researcher, right, I love storytelling. And qualitative research is what provides the story, right? You want to hear literally from the horse's mouth why you're a horse, not what I think, but like why this is your lived experience, right? And everybody wants to do that until they get the conversation back. And they have to realize, oh, we've probably been doing some stuff. There's some gaps. There's some complete holes. Actually, we could completely miss this population of people because we didn't even take them into account 10 years ago, 5 years ago, in the month that we were talking about. And that is the issue. And I think one of the things that works well with us, Pam, your numbers. Like you like looking at the numbers, but in looking
Love
at the
data.
numbers, you're like, but where did that number come from? That's the story, right? And so we know, and that it'll jump to 4, but I'm not gonna like uh uh harp on it right now, but it goes back to those best practice type measurements where you're like, well, the best practice is for you to know what your numbers are, and you're not even tracking the right number. You're tracking one demographic, and you're not even doing the whole person. You're not looking at the intersections of that person. As someone who has again been in a lot of different spaces in my career, I can tell you a handful of times where I've actually been allowed to be a part of the data because I'm such a small number. So my lived experiences, even though they're valid for really pushing a lot of different strategies, I'm not counted a lot of times. And so when they're like, yeah, we looked at the numbers, but you literally didn't look at my number because of. And one of the things I love that you do so well, Pam, is that when you look at data and you have a small number, you collapse it into other things because you understand intersectionality. So it's like, wait, if this group is small and this group is small, how many people are overlapping in these groups? And we still need their experience. But I
Right,
have been in spaces where my experience has been completely cut off because it would be very easy to track me,
right.
right? So I think that's one of the things that when we look at the data, what type of data are you trying to analyze? And what is the purpose of your data? What are you going to do with the data? And by, you know what? Because we cuss in this place. if you're not gonna if you're not gonna use the data that you have, please stop asking people for it. It blows
Absolutely.
my mind the amount of times where folks are like, get the data, you gotta get all this data, get this data, and you give them the shit. And they literally sit there and be like, well, we're not gonna use that part. No, we're not gonna use
No.
that part. That part doesn't make any, well, that's gonna make us look horrible. Then don't even ask people for it. That's why people be mad.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's why folks have an attitude. That's why folks are like, this organization sucks. They don't do what they say. They don't put their money where they say they're going to put it, because when you ask them to give their lived experiences, you don't even use the data that you've been given to make a better and more informed decision. And now we have a perfect time. They are evaluating us. They are asking for our feedback. We are hearing they don't like this, they don't like this, they don't like this. What are you doing with that information? Are you just, I don't like the way you said it, so yeah, the information is not given. I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to listen to it. We could do that for a lot of different populations if that's the case.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
so I can't, I hate that. Like it it makes my teeth itch when people do that, because it really, don't ask me for data that you're not about to use, and don't say you're a data driven organization when you actually don't read the data and implement the things necessary, even when it's not good. How can you just
Hmm.
be like, I'm only going to take the good pieces of this. I'm not going to ever look at the bad pieces. And then we end up in the situations that we're in right now, where we have legislation that's coming after us because we're cherry picking the pieces that we want to utilize, and we're not listening or looking at the whole story, how hard it may be. Listen to the whole story and create a vision that people can follow, because they know that, well, damn, they actually took some time to hear me. That
Right.
goes a long way. People are still people. I don't care if they're orange, but that's a whole other conversation.
Well, and you're right that we're opening ourselves up to lawsuits when we
Mm,
don't look at it correctly. And I know you and I were in a room together once where this particular organization had was tracking like every demographic group except white cisgender men.
mm,
And I said, wait, where are the white men? You've got 16 columns up here. Where are the white men? They're like, oh no, we don't track white men. And I'm like, why not? And they're like, well, because you're not supposed to, right? And I was like, no, you are, because we have to face it. Like everybody's going through challenges. And to your point, sometimes we've been addressing certain challenges because that they're majority white men,
mm,
but now we're not addressing those challenges. And when, again, I mentioned earlier, when you see the depression, anxiety, and sleeplessness medication on the rise for white men, and we're not even tracking that, and we know, you and I both know that the graduation rate for white
mm,
men is the only declining population. And if we as an organization say, oh, but we're not going to look at that group, we are not only opening ourselves up to lawsuit, but it really isn't a data driven strategy. Because if you put all the data in there and then you say what populations are experiencing anything different than the rest, we need to look at that and we need to inspect it. We need to be curious about it. And so I do love data. I do like pulling out the stories in the data. And I love where we've come now with technology, the things that we can do and the way that we can do virtual focus groups
mm,
and analyze the data using Workday and SAP and all these other, it just wasn't possible 10 years ago. And I get up on stage now sometimes in some of these conferences and they're like, well, Pam, it's just a lot easier now to do this. I'm like, it's not just easier. It wasn't possible.
mm,
And now it's possible. And so anyone saying, well, we can't look at the data for these small populations or we can't uncover the stories there, it's just not true. We can do it with all of these great tools and technologies. So I definitely think these top ones that we're giving, don't panic, reframing this pushback is feedback, and then really challenging yourself to have a data driven approach. Those are our top three. But you and I have got
yes.
a couple more that we've
Mm.
got to highlight. And that first one is one of those things that just gets me. I have to calm myself down is when a company says, "Pam, but these are best practices," and I'm like, "Honey, those are common
Right.
practices." And you cannot disguise. And I'll even sometimes because I try to be a little edgy. I'll sometimes say, "Listen, if somebody comes and says to me, 80% of companies are doing this," I'm like, then you
Hmm.
should stop because let's be clear, we have to evolve. This work has to evolve. And often these common practices that are disguised as best practices, we have to challenge them. And that's where, sadly, a lot of money is
Oh.
being spent on some of these trainings and unconscious bias trainings and things that they said, but everybody's doing and we
Mm-hmm.
have to do them.
No, that's facts. So I think both of us can't stand unconscious bias training. Like I really cannot. I've sat through so many of them, and it's not always the facilitator. It's actually the messaging that is the issue. And I've said in many spaces, every time shit has happened to me, they were conscious. They knew what they were doing. They were in the driver's seat. So when you're saying
Right.
unconscious, it's like all I can think of is this person who was like, I have no idea where I'm at. I had no idea I called you that and I touched you in a what? I didn't know. No, you knew what you were doing. You didn't know what the consequence was going to be. You didn't know it was about to go down like what it is, but you knew what you were doing. Stop saying that. You may not have put as much thought into it as you may for, some type of hyperbolic math problem that you were sitting here studying for. No, that's not what happened. It's so common to you that you didn't think about it. And that's why when it happened and I said something to you, it was jarring because no one either has ever said anything to you about it or it's so common and other people are such great bystanders that you've never been called out or called in about it. So you just were like, oh shit, you're the one that's mad. And it's like, no, you actually have offended a lot of people over a long period of time. And no one has said, or you've not had to be in a space to listen. Because again, sometimes people have
Right.
said things, you just not been in a position to listen. You may not have had to listen, right? So I hate when people say that. And I hate these trainings that are so arbitrary, that don't evolve. The language doesn't evolve. The scenarios don't evolve. And Pam, I know you have had like firsthand accounts of when you start talking about some things that you talked on the back end, because a lot of shit happens on the back end. So we're talking on the back end, and the organization are telling us what's happening on the back end, but they've never shared that.
So, because there's a couple of situations, right? And the first is, these some things are happening in your organization, and I always say this information in the hands of your leaders is so powerful, but in the hands of a plaintiff's attorney is crushing. So I understand why the lawyers say don't share it, but then your managers are going, "Why am I sitting
Mm-hmm.
through this training?" And so we had a situation the other day where something just super egregious happened, and the attorneys wanted me to train on how to spot this and interrupt this, and they're like, that's silly, that would never happen here. And then you finally have to say, if I can't tell them, in fact it happens
Mm-hmm.
monthly here, you can't tell them it's happening, then they think that we're doing these ridiculous trainings. So the scenarios have to be built on things that are happening in your organization, and you have to tell your employees that they're happening here. So if you throw up a scenario about Starbucks barista calling the police on two Black patrons and they got arrested, we all saw that
Mm-hmm.
in the news. But then if you're asking me to apply that and say, how is that showing up here in our organization? People can't make that leap. And so they walk away going, well, that was an hour wasted of my time because that's not going to happen here. But if you could tell the stories that are happening here, so you can say, how many times have you accidentally handed your car keys to a Black or Hispanic person thinking they were the valet, and you hand it to them and they say, I'm not the valet, and you're like, oops, sorry. And then you go around the room and the Black and Hispanic men in the room say, well, that's happened to me. And the white men want to say, well, that's just an accident. And then I ask the white men in the room, how many of you have ever had your car keys handed to you thinking you're the valet? Not one of them raises their hand. And then you say to the people of color in the room, how many of you have had an instance? They start telling stories and they're like, and the Black men are like, yeah, I had one client where he said how many times people jump in his car thinking he's the Uber driver, and he's like, get the fuck out of my car.
It's
And this is this is a
terrifying.
big Black man, and he's like, get out of my car. And the white men are like, oh my God, that's happened to you? And he's like, yes, it happens to me. And white men have to understand it doesn't happen to them, right? And then the Hispanic men who'll say, oh, I'm in my yard doing yard work in
Mm-hmm.
my home, and someone will come up and ask me for a business card. They say, oh, I love what you're doing with this person's yard. Can I call and hire you? Dude, this is my house. No, I'm not going to come into your yard. And those things that are happening to people that are not happening, that's the word privilege, right? Privilege isn't about what you had to endure, it's what you don't have
That
to
best
endure.
practice says when you see something happen, you challenge it. But nowhere in that scenario do they say, you know, you're still black doing that, right? You do realize that you're not going to be treated in the same way. So you need to pick and choose your battles, right? But again,
Right.
if we go back to the conversation around the leadership, that's what they teach you. They teach you to be sacrificial in that without recognizing that everybody can't. And depending on the situation, and I know anybody listening to this, you have stories. You have stories. And some of those stories are completely egregious. Some of those things were like, hey, I had to pick and choose if it was a good day to die. That's not good. That's not a good thing for you to be having to sit with and having to contemplate while it's going on. Wow, I want to be a good practitioner, and also recognizing my livelihood is at stake. My family is at stake. My family who did not sign up for this is at stake. All of these things are happening simultaneously in milliseconds. And so you almost have to stop and be like, I understand why sometimes people don't say stuff. I understand because it happened to me. You still, oh yeah, I was trained to do this. I was trained to have these types of conversations, and it happens, and now you don't work there no more. What is taught is if you see bias, if you see an egregious act happening, you call it out, you name it. But if you look at the people who paved the way before us, they went to jail. They lost their livelihoods. Some of them lost their lives and you don't know their names. So it's not like at the end you get a trophy that they're going to be like, oh, Patrice did this for us. Patrice, no. So it goes back on, but will you still do it? Will you still make that sacrifice? And guess what? We got 100 days, and people are going to be doing some shit that you have never seen before. People will be feeling emboldened. We already have seen it. We saw it years ago, and it's going to be worse now.
And that's why, it, I will be bold and say, first 100 days, stop your trainings
Ooh,
now. Like stop those canned, unconscious bias or any type of DEI training that are not specific to
you gonna
your
lose friends. I just want you
organization.
to know that.
Stop them now because they're expensive and they're mad. And I get asked quite often to audit some of these trainings, and I can't even stomach going through the whole thing, right? Because I look at this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is
Mm-hmm.
horrific, right? But if you can convert these into conversations, where you're scenario based, this happened in an organization, and it needs to be probably somewhat modified to protect the people, but this is kind of the generic, and then open it up for conversation. And to your point, Patrice, what would you do if you see this, and prepare people, because we are not prepared. We do this all the time, and my brain still
It,
freezes
it
when it
happens. It's
happens.
real. So
And
it's a
it happens.
human thing. That's the
Yeah,
thing. Fight, flight, or
yeah,
freeze is real. It's a psychological state of being, and yeah,
yeah. And you're still trying to figure out, like, what did they just say? Is that what they said? And then, so if you teach people, hey, here's the scenario, what would you do if you see this happening? Because if our trainings are all about us being the perpetrator, then you've given me no action other than don't do that
mm-hmm.
stupid thing. And it's like, I won't. So I just listened to an hour training telling me not to do something I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't do anyway. But if the conversations are around how do you interrupt the behavior when you see it, then we all have an action, right? We all need to be on the lookout, but then you still have to tell me what to say. Like my favorite is like, yikes, or ouch,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
oops, something to interrupt it in the moment, because it gives your brain a second to catch up. And then you can go, and then it stops the conversation.
I think another thing that you brought up that I want folks to listen to is a lot of times when when you're inclusive of everyone, and I've said this and we've said this, inclusion is not exclusive, right? But people don't actually know that, because when you start including white men, it's like, why would you include them? Because
Right.
we're including everyone actually, and
Right.
why not? Like, especially if you're going to be data driven, but like that's not watering it down. We're not
Right.
catering to a group because we say you need to be, because honestly that's the same language that has been used on people of color for generations. Oh, if you include them, then you can't go to school with them because you got to bring the standard down, because if you include them we have to bring the standard. Why? I was smart before you. I've been smart. I'm gonna be smart. That's how it works, actually. But oh, you got this because they had to lower the standard. We're saying the same thing in a roundabout way when we say that when we bring white men back into the conversation. Well, if you do, then you have to be very careful in the way that you actually should have been always careful in how you talk to people. You actually should always have tact.
Right.
You should also always be mindful of the words that you're using, and everybody is not going to get it, and you need to make an extra effort to make sure that that's happening across the board. It's the exact same thing that is happening in these sessions where you are literally saying, yo, everybody who has not suffered this particular issue, you go sit in the hall, because I'm only talking to these folks.
Mm-hmm.
There are times where I have to say, yo, I'm talking to my people. I'm talking to the folks who have this lived experience. I want you to know that you are center in this conversation. But that doesn't mean that as I continue the conversation that I am now shutting out everyone else. I'm just saying I want to bring a light. I want to shine a light on this for us in this moment, because it doesn't always get said. It's not always plainly stated that this was actually created for this reasoning, and this is why we're talking about it, and this is how it's helped all of these other groups of people. So we know, based on what the literature tells us, is that adults do not learn by being told what to do. They learn by experience. Like, we know that is not a that's not just a Patriceism right now. That's literally literature about 100 years of how to learn. We know this is how adults actually learn, and they learn in experience, and that experience has to be tied to their job. It can't just be like an arbitrary thing that happens. It has
Right.
to be tied to something, and they have to see it. And so again, when we're thinking about how these things need to show up, how we need to show up in this first 100 days, this needs to almost be like we do vision boards, and we do like, what am I going to do for the year 2025? This is what you need to be doing professionally. Like, and it needs to be a habit. It needs to become something that you have learned. One of those things is shining a light on ourselves. Because, baby, there's so many
Mm-hmm.
folks who are practitioners of this work who will tell you all the things and know all the theories and know how to say it and know how it should be done, and be the ones that are spouting the most shit that you are like, you cannot do that. And when they are called to it, they are just like, well, I'm this racial group. I'm this this marginalization. I can say that. No, the fuck you can't. Say it again. Say it again. Because remember, rights come with lefts. So understand, I have a there are consequences to things, and people don't always take that as a no. You don't. You can't. And if you're going to say it, understand what the consequence will be when you say that. Sometimes standing on business is also recognizing that the business I'm standing on is probably not the best business to be standing on in this moment. I probably need to be doing something different. But that's not what folks are. So if we want to look at this for the first 100 days, think of this as it's not a diet plan, because y'all don't want to stick to diet plans. Think about this as a lifestyle change. This is a lifestyle change. In our lifetime, in our lifestyle as practitioners, this is what we should be doing. This is how we should be modeling it. And we should be able to have a community that can call us in when we start reverting back to what we know. We need to be able to do
Mm-hmm.
that. I love doing that. I love our team, because when I tell you, I'm going to get called. I'm gonna get the calls. That y'all do not have a problem. With being like, so, and it's always sweet.
Yeah.
It's always not all the time. Not all the time. Sometimes y'all be like, seriously, really? That's what we doing today?
I think we need a section that's saying that that was always wrong or that was always
That
illegal,
was
right?
always
And so
illegal.
a whole section, because my thing, like a lot, again, we're getting a lot of calls as everybody is going, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? What do you think? And I was like, listen, the things that are coming under attack were always unlawful. So as an example, when I would hear somebody say, listen, you've got two candidates and you've got a woman candidate, you've got a man candidate, all else being equal, hire the woman because we need more women. That was always unlawful, like always, right? And so now you're getting sued for it. And they're like, Pam, why'd I get sued for it? Because that was always
Always.
illegal, right? And so some of these things that people are now like, well, Pam, I had this quote out there that 12% of our new hires needed to be Black. Again, always
Always.
illegal, right? So so when a lot of this pressure that we open this on ourselves, to your point, Patrice, by people doing things that they didn't like understand were, or they didn't understand, they
Mm,
didn't care, were always illegal. And so I think that's part of it is our, as a community, we've got to upskill ourselves, right? And we have to start understanding what is how do we do this lawfully? And one of the areas, and this is my
mm.
fifth one, right? The fifth one that we've got a whole list of things to do in the first 100 days, but as we look at those top five that are on our mind, is connecting the DEI to the talent and
Ooh,
business strategies. And you and I have said this since we met
yeah.
years back, right? Is that's been the biggest miss. It's always been wrong, but now you're going to have to do it, right? And so I know people would call me and say, Pam, I want to hire you to come in and do a DEI strategy. I was like, do you have a talent strategy? Yes. Well, then you don't need a DEI strategy. You need a DEI plan. You need a path forward. You need to look at your talent strategy through a lens of DEI. And that's what I've said. So anybody can, remember from the very beginning, since 2012, I have said, you do not need a DEI strategy. You have a talent strategy. Research continues to show us one of the biggest areas where there's unconscious bias is in who gets feedback and what
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
feedback they get, right? And so we know that the quantity of feedback, we can look now at word count, and the amount of word count that certain racial groups are getting is like 25 compared to others are getting 750 words, right? So just simple things like looking at the word count. I did an analysis for a company, and we looked at
Mm,
directors and above, and we looked at what were they all being encouraged to do, and we looked at it by gender. And the women were often being said, ask for help, ask for help. You need to figure out how to ask for more help. But the men were being told to delegate. And I could not find in hundreds of directors that were received feedback, I could not find where one woman was the word delegate was used for a woman director. And in every case, the men were being told to delegate more. That's an unconscious bias where we're using different words. We're telling men to delegate, we're telling women to ask for help. Very different in terms of
mhm,
empowerment. These were the same level. Well, now with AI, we can look for that very easily. It's not hours
mhm.
of searching, right? It's having AI go and look and see what are the differences in feedback that you're getting based on your age, your generation, based on your gender, based on your race, based on anything that you can look at. And and so in that particular case, we went out with a feedback program
Mhm.
for our client that looked at how do you give effective feedback, right? And at B Labs, we've been working on this for over the last year because that's where biases occur. But when we roll this program out, it's not going to be rolled out as a
Mhm.
DEI program. It's not going to be rolled out as anything other than we need to have high performing teams. And to have high performing teams, we have to give everyone on that team equitable feedback. And so here's this feedback method that we're going to deploy. Now, we all know underlying it was because we knew our historically marginalized and underrepresented groups were getting
Right.
different feedback. But when we rolled it out to the organization, everyone is going to benefit from getting better
Absolutely.
feedback. And so that's that, you have to connect DEI into your talent strategies, into your normal processes. And I think we should have always
Mhm.
been doing it. We told people to do it for the last 20 years. Now you're going to have to, because anything that says this is a DEI program is going to have a bit of a target on
Absolutely.
it.
So my thing around the talent strategy is truly, if you do not want the talent, don't try to bait them, especially the generations that are coming. Gen Z will tell you to your face, nope, See, my generation, we're still polite. We will quietly quit very nicely, very passively. Gen Z just ain't gonna show up to work. Gen Z gonna take all your passwords. You're gonna be like, where can you answer? No, because I know what you're calling me for. This group is coming in and they are bold. They are bold, and I support it. I support it because I hope they help me to be more bold as well. But that talent, y'all missing out on some good talent because you got some folks who are fearless, but you don't want to do the work to actually create belonging and to create a culture of belonging for them. But you want to give them a DEI program because you think that's cute. Like, no.
And I think if there's any case for keeping your programs, it's generational because this next generation's coming in. And for those of us that are in leadership, for me, 57 years old, um, I struggle like and I think you all know we have a lot of interns that come through our work, and one of went dark on me for like 2 weeks, and we didn't no responses. He didn't return calls. I couldn't get anything, and then come back and they find out he had broke up with his girlfriend. He's like, so I just couldn't work, and I'm like, or return a phone call, and I'm like, I don't understand. I went to divorce and I was at work the next day,
Death has
right?
happened,
And
and
I'm
I'm
not
like,
saying
yo,
her to help
I'm
me.
here. What do you need me to do?
I know. And so you just go, you can't, they ghost you so easily. And like, I had to take some time off because, I broke up with my girlfriend. I'm like, you are 18 years old, you're going to have a lot of challenges. So this was a great time together, Patrice. I always love our
Yes.
conversations. We could go on forever. So, but I really do, some of the things that just stuck with me. One thing is when you think about what to stop
Mm,
doing now, is obviously stop panicking. That's you get great advice there. Also, look at your trainings this year. Don't just roll into trainings. People are on high alert. They're anxious. You put them through a mandatory 1 hour training on things that just don't apply to them. You're going to really open yourself up. Challenge those common
mhm,
practices and really understand if they're best practices. Connecting your efforts to your talent and business strategies is a must. It's always
mhm,
been a must, right? So these are not new things, but they're things you
mhm,
must do. And I would say, one thing I know about is people. We develop people, we train
mhm,
dogs. That was something that was told to me early on that really hit me hard, which is how are we developing people, not just focused on training? And when you're looking at things like words, they matter, right? We have an entire session on words matter because when someone just says, hey, in 2025, I want everybody to be more inclusive, and everybody goes, absolutely. What does
yeah.
that mean? Like, what are the behaviors? So, the work is going to be hard this year because it's going to require us to do what we should have always
Mhm,
been doing as practitioners, which is describe the behaviors, stop with the catchy phrases and telling everybody to be more inclusive. What does that mean? Tell me, what does being inclusive mean? Give me those 2 or 3 behaviors of what an inclusive person looks like. And so I'm actually
mhm,
excited about the spotlight being on us, Patrice, because I feel like our team, we've always really done it legally. We've stayed away from illegal behaviors. We've done it in a way that
yeah,
engages people because this is learning new words, learning things. It's so exciting. I get
mhm,
excited when I learn something new. And I really think we have an opportunity for this work to be
mhm,
exciting again. But it is going to challenge ourselves to look and use this moment as feedback to us as practitioners. What were
mhm.
derailers and how can we actually make this work exciting
Yeah,
again?
I'm excited about making sure that people learn again. I don't think people were learning. I think people were doing. I think people were following step, and they were okay, this is what we have to do, and it made us robots. It's so funny that folks are fighting or around AI and it's going to replace us. This really learning more, and that's what it's doing, and we have lost that. We've lost the ability to learn in these ways, especially in our workspaces. It's not just about your job, it's about the interactions that you have within your organization. It's about how you are connecting with your colleagues and how you're producing at a rate that's actually beneficial not only for the organization but also for you as a purpose driven individual. We all want that. We all want to find our purpose. Working in higher ed, I have that's what most of the students ask. Well, what is my purpose? Why am I here? And I'm like, I don't get to tell you that. You have to discover that. And it's okay, the journey that goes around that discovery. And we are in a chance of discovery when we are working with folks who don't agree with us. And we know this, and I think we do this really well, but we actually like when people don't agree with us because it makes us better. Because now we have to go back and be like, shit, why do we do that? Oh yeah, I know I do that. And I can
Right.
defend what I'm doing, right? And so we are in that space. That's one of the reasons why Don't Panic is my number one, because we are in a place now where we get to showcase why this is important and why it matters. Here's our data-driven approach. Here is how we've tied it to strategy. This is why it matters. And guess what? I don't know if this is controversial or whatever, but they're already doing DEI in the administration. So can we talk about that? Can we talk about that? Because it's already happening when we're bringing in different people to do jobs. That's already happening. It's already, hey, have you thought about this group of people who are really good at this thing? We need to integrate them better into, maybe that's DEI 101, ain't it? But again, when we look at it, it's like, oh no, we're only talking about it from this perspective. It's only going to help this. No, this is absolutely a time of learning. And I think we need to approach it through a lens of learning. But these are business strategic initiatives that need to be well thought out, and they need to have a plan, and they need to be flexible in the event that what we think will work doesn't work. Because I don't know if you've met people, but they are complex individuals.
Well, I love it, and I am excited about
Mm,
the year, and I think that's probably the question I get most is I'm
yeah.
not scared. I love when the attention turns, to this work because it is so important, and I'm not at all nervous about how organizations are going to. How to handle this, because at the end of the day it's about your people. If you think about your people, and is there any leader out there that wouldn't want to understand if there's any differences in what your employees are experiencing day to day? And if you don't care about that, you're probably not a great leader. So I'm talking to the good leaders that say, I want you to understand, we can help understand what are the experiences and where are their gaps and experiences by any demographic group. That right there, everybody should raise their hand and say, absolutely, I want to do it. I don't care if you call that DEI. I don't care if you call it high performing teams. I don't care if you call it employee experience. Call it what culture, whatever you want to call it. That's what this work has always been about and should have been about. And I think we need to take some of this feedback from the external and say, how do we phrase this or talk about this or work in this way that doesn't derail the efforts, but instead accelerates them. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of Let's Not Circle Back. Dr. Patrice Palmer and I covered a lot of ground today. We talked about how important it is to reframe this pushback we are receiving into actionable feedback, and how critical it is to tie this work directly to your talent strategy. Remember, this work is about creating spaces where everyone can thrive and grow, and it starts with intentionality. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so connect with us on social media or share this episode with someone who's ready to rethink how they approach DEI. And please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and let's not circle back.